Hello, we are live. Hi, Mark. Welcome back.
Hello. Thank you. It's good to be back.
What was the highlight? What was the main tool of choice yesterday? Looking after two children.
Main tool of choice. It's always the television. The
Excellent.
television, which we have nicknamed the third parent, but it does the job.
Excellent.
That and a lot of Paw Patrol. A
Paw
lot of Paw
Patrol.
Patrol.
Finley's still very much Thomas the Tank Engine on the TV.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think Fire Stick. I'd have to go like a layer above TV. It's probably the Fire Stick that's driving it. But anyway, welcome to day 5 of 30 Days of Tools. So if you're not tuned in before, 30 Days of Tools is happening right now with Ministry of Testing, where we are giving you a daily challenge centered around tools to get you sharing, connecting, curating content, building content, having conversations with people, and just generally sharing all our awesome knowledge around tools. And me and Mark agreed that we would stream every weekday, to basically take part and share our own answers to some of the challenges, as well as take a look at what the community have been chatting about. So
Day 5.
fire away, take it away, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, I must admit, I am a little behind. And I was mentioning this to Simon, and he thought it would be, it's important to stress as well as that, we're doing each day. But I think there's a lot of people in the community there's going to be times where you just don't have the opportunity to work on it. So my plan is I'm going to look at day 5 today, but I am going to go back and I'm going to do day 3 and 4 because I haven't quite done those. Because you sent me a tool from the Wheel of Tools.
Well, we can do day 3 now because day 4 is just picking the tool. So if you want to do day 3,
go on then. So remind me what day 3 was.
It won't take you long. Day 3 is Mark. How do you evaluate a tool?
How do I evaluate a tool? Oh, so I did share a little bit, didn't I, on the stream yesterday whilst waving goodbye to the in-laws. So you mentioned yesterday, I saw you mention about the sort of first of all, I think it's having a problem in mind. Sometimes it is great to have a little play with a tool and just sort of, not necessarily have a purpose for it, but having a bit of a sort of a play to just sort of understand how it works. And if that's what I was sort of saying in the chat was if it sparks joy, if it Marie Kondo's your life. But something that sort of kind of gets you a bit interested, a bit excited. If you can see potential in it, I think that's pretty good. But ultimately, a lot of the time, I think it's what sort of problem am I trying to solve, and use that as the evaluation. So you mentioned about the sort of the 10, 15-minute idea of time boxing it so you don't spend hours and hours sinking stuff into it.
Many a time.
Yeah. So that sort of stuff I think is important. Documentation, I think, has become more and more important to me as communities around tools have established. So I think ones to sort of call out is Cypress. Pact has very comprehensive documentation, maybe not the most comprehensible, in terms of it's not easy to interpret what's going on in Pact documentation, but strong communities around tools have good documentation, or at least extensive documentation, which is really useful because there's nothing more frustrating than working with a tool that you don't know how it works, but you don't necessarily have any idea of how it works. Circle CI as well, I should shout out to those guys as well for they have very, very good support documentation and things like did they have a discourse or sort of Slack or Discord or something like that to ask questions around that. I remember I had an issue with Webpack and I asked a question on Discord and nobody responded to me, and that was it. I just killed Webpack for me. So
I think Dominic mentioned that yesterday. Do they have an active community? But Mark, there's a story to share here about documentation.
Yeah.
So me and Mark I can't remember exactly what we were hacking on, but we were hacking on something that we came across a problem. We came across a problem and we opened up the documentation to get on separate machines but sat next to each other. And I started reading the documentation, and Mark was just scrolling to try and find some code that he thinks
yes.
might solve his problem. And then we realised that we had very different patterns to utilising documentation. Mine was to like read it and try and understand what their intentions is, maybe the API structure. Mark's was to just keep trying code blocks that appear on the page until something in his head clicks and he could carry on.
It's exactly what I did with the packed stuff when I was learning that recently. But my like to my credit and to my defense, I think if you've got to work, like especially like in the sort of the automation tooling side and stuff, if you have a well established API that's clear in its clear in its intent, has well named methods, that sort of stuff, then I feel like that should be enough sometimes.
Okay.
And then like the documentation should be more about sort of explaining and elaborating on it more. So yes, it was Source Labs. I remember now, it was Source Labs. We were trying to get Source Labs set up. Yeah.
Excellent. Right. So awesome. Thank you for that, Mark. So day 4, I did spin the wheel for you, and the goal here was just to pick a tool, but you got quite a simple.
I already used that tool. But it was a cookie editor, so I think I'm gonna spin the wheel again. Maybe
you want to spin the wheel, or do you want to? Is there any tool that's like screaming out to you at the moment that you're desperate to find the reason to play with?
No, I kind of like the idea of giving it a spin, or like a bit. I want a bit of serendipity, because I think that's something as well. Like talking about being tool aware, we have our methods and our means to find things, but like we talk about Mockaroo, and that was pure serendipity. If someone just turned up to a workshop one day and went, "This is Mockaroo," and we went, that was amazing. There was. I think that sometimes having problems to solve and that sort of thing is very good, but sometimes just having the opportunity for something to accidentally land on your desk, so to speak, I think is quite good. So that's why I'm gonna Wheel of Tools it, but I'll do that after this probably.
Excellent. Okay. Well, good luck when you spin the wheel. Now today, challenge 5. Let me open that up. Interesting. Okay. So challenge 5 is, what tools do you think are underrated or misunderstood? So that's the challenge we've been giving you all today. Before me and Mark dive into it, Simon Tomes, community boss, has given us a few helpful hints. Are there any tools that get a bad rep that perhaps they shouldn't? What features of a tool are commonly used, are not commonly used but should be? And what tools are you familiar with that aren't really talked enough about in the community? So that's kind of where we're trying to get to. So yeah, what tools do you think are underrated or misunderstood?
So I think the classic, which Lee's mentioned in the chat, Pirate Tester, hi Lee, is talking about James Espy's comment about Jira. I think it does get a lot of negativity. I think that something like Jira, the problem isn't necessarily the tool. Sometimes it's the people administrating it. But like you said, what's the alternative? Well, I think it was probably Trello, but then they bought Trello and they're turning it into Jira. So,
well, they bought Trello and then just made it impossible to log into the bloody thing.
Oh yeah.
You had no choice but not to use it. That's awful.
Yeah.
Right, so there's an interesting comment again from Lee here, actually, that he thinks shortcuts are a bit overlooked and underappreciated. And me and you, we've done some live streams in the past, haven't we? And there's a few things you can turn on in like Atom and VS Code and things, and that show you the shortcuts on the screen as you do them. I definitely encourage people to do that. That's really important.
Whenever I move like to a new laptop, I'm pretty much in the Mac ecosystem, so every time I move MacBooks, the first thing I always install is Quicksilver, which is kind of like an open source version of I forgot what it's called now. The one that Mac has. What's it called? With the magnifying Spotlight. That's it. Yeah. And actually, that is like the most important tool to me, like while working in terms of productivity and stuff. So. I like my desktop completely clear. I don't like it when I have icons on there. I want everything keyboard driven. So that's always the tool I use first. But it's so sort of it's so behind the scenes, so to speak. Like I don't even recognize it. So I'd say that's an underrated one.
Well, we were chatting about one today. I know it's not necessarily like maybe not testing related, but like I use Rectangle that used to be Spectacle for rearranging screens like you can on a Mac. So you get to we get to snap your windows in places and stuff like that. And my keyboard broke the other day, so my little son has been bashing my keyboard. It's one of his favourite things to come to work and sit at the desk. And he's broken my Alt key, and I just hadn't realised how much I was using this feature. But if I'm going to answer it honestly, and I think the answer for me is going to be fairly obvious, but for me it's probably Selenium. And the reason why I'm saying Selenium as being underrated and misunderstood is people give it a hard time for things that it doesn't do. So people give it a hard time for having bad assertions or having flaky test execution, which isn't Selenium. That's because people use other tools with Selenium, but they claim that they're just using Selenium. And if you just purely looked at what Selenium does, as in terms of driving a browser, it's borderline flawless. Like it most of the time it does what it's meant to do. It's not a test. It's not a test framework. It's not a tool for doing automated testing. You can do that if you combine it with a test framework, with a test runner, with some straight up code. You can make it do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of just starting a browser, enabling you to interact with that browser, it is incredibly good at what it does. And that's where a lot of these other tools have kind of jumped ahead. So things like Cypress and Playwright, they've combined all the tools you need to do end-to-end or UI automation. So when they've got test frameworks built in, they've got assertion libraries built in, they've removed all that. So therefore, people try and compare it to these other tools, and it's not. You've got a lot of things that you need to do to make an end-to-end or a UI framework that utilizes Selenium. And most of the time, it's not Selenium at fault. So anyway, that's my mini rant over.
No, it's like comparing a saw to a whole CAD system. You use a saw to cut something, but you've got a lot of other tools to work out and measure and stuff. Whereas, CAD system will do it all for you. That's why I wrote that article recently around, and why I did the workshop about the building blocks of UI automation. Because even if you're using something like Cypress, I think it's important to understand how those different parts work together, because it just makes it easier for you to manage what you're working on, and like I say, just improves your design as well, rather than sort of blaming the tools.
And this comment here from William in the chat, we encourage new testers, and if you are there saying, "Oh look, our tool that we use is Selenium," you're kind of setting them up to fail at some point, because you're not necessarily to fail, but they're going to think they just need to learn Selenium. If you go on and then start reading the documentation, it's not all there, because why would they write about a test framework when they're not a test framework? So I think that's kind of the big difference, really, about being misunderstood as a tool, and therefore gets blamed for things that it would never intended to do in the first place. So that's my obvious one. I'm trying to think of some others that come up. I can't really think of any, so I'm going to jump to the chat while Mark's he's back.
I'm sorry. Right. My daughter's dressed up as a dinosaur and wanted to show me. It's so cute.
Is there any other tools that you come to mind for yourself, Mark, about being underrated or misunderstood before we dive into the comments?
I think you know what I'm going to say, which is it's got to be Cucumber. It's got to be that. It's like any BDD tool. Anytime I see stuff where BDD is mentioned as a noun, I've done the BDDs. It's no.
Love myself a bit of BDDing.
Bit of BDDing.
Nice day doing some BDDing. Right.
Yeah. But yeah, crucially, before I joined Mott, I was doing training in BDD and talking a lot about that stuff and written about it. But yeah, it's understanding that it is a design process. It's a communication tool. It is not an approach to use necessarily for automation. That said, like I have seen people do some crazy stuff with Cucumber because basically Cucumber is just a regex matcher. When you look at it, when you boil it down to what the actual tool is, it's a regex matcher and a framework. It's a runner. So you can do some odd things with it if you so choose. But I think ultimately, yeah, like I see a lot of people using it in a way that's not correct, and then there's this like this negativity around it. It's sort of like, oh, well, Cucumber's terrible, or you shouldn't use Cucumber. It's like you should use those tools, but you should use them for the means that they were designed for, which is for like guiding developers in delivery, not necessarily checking all the things. So that's probably mine. And I would say as well, again, another thing, you think about Cucumber, it's been around nearly a decade. Same with like Selenium. These are open source projects that are well established and have been carrying on through the good times and the bad times. And I think that's a real credit to all of them as well, because there's other tools that are out there that just sort of appear and disappear. So yeah, I'd say it's probably that.
Excuse me. I think there's kind of an underlying message or like an underlying theme that's like it's coming for me clearer for me, and it's kind of two angles to it. One of them is as engineers, as software professionals, like getting better at sharing our narratives. So getting better at explaining the ways that we work and the tools that we use and how each tool is, the little bit that each tool is doing, and kind of getting better at being perhaps maybe a bit clearer when we say what tools we're using for what. I think that would help. And then I think excuse me, I think the one after that is probably is like the actual, community training, the content and the way that we talk about it as a community.
Yeah.
When we explain what we're doing and the tools we're using, like we need to be careful of not going around like, I'm doing it now, like not correcting people. I don't think we need to do that, but we need to try and, when we read the odd thing, just encourage people maybe to give us a little bit more information. Like, you've said you're doing this. Can you explain to me what you're using that for, or what you're using this for? Or are you only using that tool? Because there's obvious times when they're not. Like, they say we're using Cucumber to do our end-to-end automation. Well, you're clearly not, right? Like, it might be the very top layer of it, but under the hood, you've probably got 5, 6, 7 other libraries going on. And I want to hear about them. I want to know how you're using them, how you're making them all talk to each other, how you're structuring all that. Like, I don't want to start. I'm not going to slam you and start telling you you're not doing BDD and blah blah blah. But I know that you've got more to tell, because I know you're not using BDD to do your end-to-end automation or Cucumber, etc.
It's a certain element of like curation, isn't it, as well? Like, and seeking out sort of different perspectives, because it is difficult if you were to search for either of these tools that we've just talked about. There's a lot. It's almost because they're so popular. Like you say, that narrative has been created that's not necessarily the right one. But how do you, like, even the creators of these tools, who the things that we're talking about, I don't think they might think that our delivery is poor, but they wouldn't necessarily disagree with the point we're making. But how do you fight against that when you go for a Google search and it's just reams and reams and reams of sort of the same sort of perspective, the same sort of narrative. And I think it's also, again, sorry, one last thing to say is that I think this is a reflection about tools as well, is that if a tool doesn't necessarily work for you, it doesn't not work. It just makes things harder. And sometimes, because software is complex, that difficulty doesn't necessarily become apparent. We just try and work through it, and then sunk cost fallacy kicks in and that sort of thing as well.
Like you said, majority of the tools, like, they do what they were designed to do, as you said. It's just perhaps you've not fully understood your own problem, or you've not fully understood the limitations of the tool that you've decided to try and use. Sometimes we, as you said, we result to, well, that's a bad tool. It's like, well, we're clearly working for these 400 people who have started it, or these million people who've downloaded it. So it's just not the right tool for you. So I'm going to dive into the chat, Mark. I don't know if you've got it open as well, but I'm gonna start with Probably Cyprian. So he starts by explaining that bad rep is probably Selenium as well. Again, explaining that a lot of the issues around utilizing such tools aren't to do with Selenium. They're bad testability, stability issues, poor system testability, and so forth. But I love his answer to this. Like, what features of the tools aren't commonly used that should be? And he's gone for the logs.
Logs. Absolutely.
The amount of times where I've gone on like GitHub and been like, you don't work, and it's like, have you looked at the logs? You're like, just to help narrow it down. What logs? Where are they?
Yeah.
And you quickly find them, and even you read just like the first few lines yourself, and it's like, don't have permission to do A. Oh, okay, right. Job done. So yeah, I think logs are definitely something that enough people don't utilize. And then he's gone with Gatling. Has his tool that perhaps we don't talk enough about in the community, and I probably have to agree. I've seen there's definitely been a few talks at Test Bash where people have mentioned using Gatling, but yeah, it's definitely not a tool that I've used myself.
I actually was. So I'm back on the stream. I'm writing a book, and the chapter I'm writing about is performance testing. I'm actually writing about performance testing, and I was looking at Gatling last week. And I think that's a good example again of like something where like really good documentation, but there was something about it just wasn't. I was struggling to get myself set up with it. I just maybe it was because I was looking for the code and stuff. But it's interesting because I see that there's a mention of like YAML, so I might go back and have another look and see if I can do it like from a YAML perspective, which is very cool.
Excellent.
Actually,
if you've got
sorry, that's going to be my tool. I'm going to learn how to use Gatling. That's going to be my tool from for previous day.
Gatling it is. If you've got it up, do you want to take Dominic? Have you got the
yeah. So yeah, Bash and CLIs in general, I absolutely agree. Like I saw a mention, like Rob Devio was asking like, what tools do you use every day? And Bash. Every day, like without fail, I'm using Bash for certain things to help me in terms of getting work done. I rarely see test people talking about things like debuggers. So it's I think that's going into that vein of the log files again as well. It's that sort of additional information that's not necessarily coming through, that's through like maybe through a user interface. Built into IDEs. I mean, I must admit, like the amount of times I've done like 14 system outs in some code, and then it's like, why aren't you debugging? You should do that. And then he mentions Minicom, which I don't know. It says niche, but if you want to get a serial connection to something and you're on Linux, that is niche. Then Minicom
that's his domain, though, isn't it? He's in the embedded Linux world.
With something like Minicom, I can dump its output to a file where I work. I can have multiple terminals open with it. I can test using several devices at once. It's a great tool for a job. And that sounds cool because that's like it's exemplifying the fact that you're using a tool to get you a little bit further, a little bit quicker with something, and the fact that you can get multiple uses out of it.
So I've ended up with James, and I am. I'm probably about to break the internet. So, James Espy from Auckland, New Zealand. What tool has a bad rep that shouldn't? Jira. He says Jira does not deserve. I hate Jira. Hate it. Destroy it. Burn it. But yeah, he says Jira and Convolence, and he says, all right, they're often painful to use. That's an understatement. And they cost a lot, which is true. But he's been recently using some alternatives, and he's stating that he's missed a lot of the functionality and speed that Convolence and Jira brought to the game. So I think that's interesting.
What I was saying earlier, I think sometimes like the problem with those tools is how they're set up. I worked on a project once, and we had 2 A3 sheets that showed us the Jira process. And that's because we had one project that was internal facing and one external. And depending on what you did in the internal one determined a trigger to do something for the external one. We had to keep them in sync and stuff. And the issue there was not technological, it was a cultural thing. Like, well, why do we as an organization didn't feel like we can't just show our work and stuff? You and I have talked a lot about building in public lately. and going through that route. If you just show everything that you're doing, yes, that's scary and requires cultural change, but actually the tools become a lot easier to use because you're not managing and spinning so many plates. So I think that's fair play.
So conscious of the time, because we have a 99-minute workshop to go and run in about 14 minutes. And
I have a little dinosaur to say hello to.
Okay, fantastic. So I'm just going to flick through just to pick some out of the... so things that aren't commonly used that should be. We've also had environment variables chipped in and things like collection variables in some of the tools. Browser dev tools from Anne-Laurie. I think that's interesting because I'm an extensive user of them, but I have watched many testers never open browser dev tools. Similar thing again, it's a bit niche, but Mickey is mentioning environments in Postman. A lot of people don't use certain aspects of it. He recommends... you ready for this, Mark? He recommends Lightshot as a screenshotting tool. Not enough people use. A bad rep. He says Visual Studio still gets a bad rep, but VS Code is... Visual Studio gets a bad rep, but VS Code gets lots of love. But Visual Studio was a solid IDE. It really was.
I've got to admit, I have a real bias against VS Code because I think of Visual Studio, but actually, again, another great open source community. The things that VS Code is doing, the way it's expanding and stuff is incredible. And I feel like I've only scratched the surface. Yeah. Change your mind. Awesome. I want to do that as my tool.
This is the problem, isn't it? So there we go. That's day 5. So if you've not taken part yet in 30 Days of Tools, the awesome Link Ninja at MOT will be posting the links underneath these streams wherever you're watching it, so you can get involved. You don't have to do them all, but if you want to get involved, you can head to the club and contribute to the threads. You can respond wherever you're watching this, and if you want the challenges sent to your inbox every morning, then head over to the link on the screen and then subscribe, and we will send you them each morning. And then my final plug for you all today is tonight at 8 o'clock, we have a completely free webinar. It's an Ask Me Anything all about testing tools with Mickey. So if you're interested in asking someone their opinions and lots of stuff and get your own questions answered around testing tools, then I recommend you tune into that. So
yes, come get involved.
We will see you tomorrow. Enjoy your day.
See you all tomorrow.
Happy tooling. Bye bye.